Have you ever woken in the dark and felt the chill of steel pressed against your throat so close that a single breath could decide whether you lived or died out on the frontier? The line between survival and the grave was thin as a whisper, fragile as frost on the window. And in moments like these, a man learns that truth. Trust and fate itself can be determined by nothing more than the edge of a knife. If you believe that stories of the Old West are not only about gunfire and dust, but also about choices, about how people face one another in their most desperate hours, then stay with me. Because beneath the hard crust of violence lies a deeper question. Can we trust a stranger? Can hatred ever give way to truth? Sometimes the survivor is not the strongest fighter, but the one willing to open his heart at the right moment. Before I go on, if you can already feel the tension in these first moments, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, so together we can step into a long, suffocating night on the frontier. Marcus Stone opened his eyes into a heavy darkness, the bitter aftertaste of whiskey still clinging to his tongue. But before he could gather his thoughts, he felt at the icy edge of steel laid against his throat, colder than the desert wind, sharper than any Apache blade he had faced in 5 long years of border warfare. A woman's knee pressed into his chest, pinning him to the narrow cot. His arms were stretched helplessly at his sides, his breath shallow, every heartbeat pounding like a war drum in his ears, and through the faint scent of sage and campfire smoke, a low voice slid across the silence. Soft but merciless, like the wind that comes before a storm. My father died in this cabin last night. He breathed his last on this bed. And you were the last man to see him alive. Marcus didn't move. He couldn't. The blade traced a thin, stinging line just beneath his jaw, warm with the threat of blood. In the dim silver light filtering through the cracked shutters, he could just make out her face, high cheekbones, dark eyes steady as stone, long black hair falling like a curtain around them both. It was Kaya, the daughter of Dakota, the Apache elder who had drawn his final breath in Marcus's care, beauty wrapped in danger, fierce and unyielding. At this distance, their breaths mingled. He could feel her warmth pressing into him, hear the steady rhythm of her lungs, see in her eyes a calmness that was anything but merciful. The cabin shrank to a prison cell. The air itself seemed starved of oxygen. Only the creak of the old bed frame under their weight. Only the sound of his own racing pulse. The scent of dried blood lingered on his fingers, the very blood he had tried to wipe and bind through a sleepless night. Now that same blood was damning him, used as proof to seal his fate. He spoke at last, his voice low and rough, careful not to let the words drag the knife deeper into his flesh. If I had wanted your father dead, I would not have spent the night changing his bandages. Kaya's silence weighed heavier than the steel at his throat. The knife did not move, but Marcus caught the faintest tremor in her grip, not from fear, but from rage burning too long inside her. The room pressed closer. Each breath felt like walking a tightrope stretched over the abyss. Time itself seemed frozen, trapped with them in the dim cabin. And for both Marcus and for us, there was only one question hanging in the air. Would the blade fall in vengeance, or in justice in that suffocating darkness? Marcus wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for the truth. A truth fragile enough to be drowned by grief, suspicion, and a daughter's fury. And the question remains not only for him, but for us as well. If you were Kaya, her father dead, the knife in your hand, what would you choose? Would you let hatred decide, or would you give truth one last chance to breathe that night? Inside the cramped wooden cabin, when Kaya finally drew her knife away from Marcus's throat, the air did not ease. The shallow cut along his skin still burned, a reminder that one wrong breath would have ended him. Survival didn't mean trust. Between them lingered only the heavy weight of grief unspoken and suspicion unresolved. Kaya stood a few steps away, fingers clenched tightly around the knife hilt. Her dark eyes bore into him, stripping away every possible lie. When she spoke, her voice carried no tremor, only the dry, merciless wind of the desert that carried blood and mourning. My uncle Ayakowa is gathering men. Apache and white raiders, both. They are preparing to strike. Not one village, not one camp. All of them. He has promised the soldiers he'll clear the land. In return, they whisper of power, of territory, of a place where he can rule like the last great chief. Marcus listened in silence, each word falling heavy, like an axe splitting rotten wood in his chest. In all his years on the frontier, he had seen enough slaughter, enough women and children dragged into the games of men who craved power. But in Kaya's eyes, this was not just a warning. It was judgment. She demanded a choice: step aside and let the blood flow, or stand with her and risk everything to stop a man who had betrayed his own blood. The bitter truth was clear. Kaya did not trust him. By all rights, she should have killed him in the dark, silenced the last witness to her father's death. Yet she stayed her hand, not out of mercy, but because her hatred was larger than the man before her. Hatred for Ayakowa, who had sold out his people. Hatred for the soldiers who bargained in lies. To stop him, she needed Marcus Stone, the very man she despised. "You are the only white man I have ever seen," she said coldly, "who tried to keep my father alive instead of ending him. That forces me to trust you. A little. But don't mistake it. Marcus Stone, my trust is as fragile as flame in the wind. One wrong step, and I'll be the one to snuff it out." Her words coiled around his throat tighter than any rope. Marcus gave no answer at first, because he knew it too well. This was no beginning of friendship, no path to love. This was a contract forged in desperation, a bond written in grief. One side carried the rage of bloodlines broken. The other carried wounds from wars that never healed. At dawn, pale light spilled across the ridges. They left the cabin behind. Marcus bound Kaya's wrists with coarse rope, the illusion of a prisoner, so they could cross hostile ground without raising fire from both sides. The fibers cut into her skin, leaving raw red marks. She didn't complain. The pain seemed to harden her vow. "I will not forgive the traitor." From the saddle, Marcus watched her stride forward. Even with wrists tied, she moved like someone no rope could hold. He knew if she wished, she could slip free in an instant, and if she did, the first man to fall would be him. They traveled in silence, only the echo of hooves against stone, only the whistle of wind between dead pines. No words could bridge the distance between a soldier who once pointed his gun at Apache and a daughter mourning her father beneath the weight of centuries. Sometimes she turned, her gaze piercing like an arrow, heavy with hatred, sharp with suspicion. Marcus wanted to speak, to explain, but he swallowed the urge. Words on this land were worth less than dust. Only action, only blood, proved a man's truth, in his chest. A question gnawed: could this alliance survive even one day? Or was this simply a mad gamble that would see them both lying in the dirt before long? Yet there was one truth Marcus could not ignore: hatred, when aimed at the same enemy, could bind stronger than trust. Kaya might not forgive him. She might still want his blood. But as long as Ayakowa lived, she needed Marcus alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only reason he still drew breath on the first morning of their reluctant alliance. On the first morning of their reluctant alliance. The sky hung gray and heavy, cold as the frontier itself. Wind whistled through the pines, carrying the sharp resin of sap and the damp bite of melting snow. Marcus tied the rope around Kaya's wrists tight enough to look convincing, loose enough not to cut deep. He knew she didn't need a knife to free herself. One twist of her hand at the right moment would undo the bonds. But the disguise was all they had an Apache prisoner and her captor if they hoped to move unseen through disputed land. The trail before them wound like a pale scar through the canyon walls. Each hoofbeat echoed against stone, like the steady toll of a death drum. Marcus rode ahead. Kaya walked behind, wrists bound, her back straight, her steps firm as if she had never known fear. That defiance drew his eyes again and again, though he knew better than to let her catch him staring. As they climbed a slope of jagged rock, Kaya's voice cut the silence like a blade. "Do you know what Ayakowa has done? He didn't just betray his own blood. He led soldiers to our winter camps where women and children hid to survive the cold. He showed them the way." That night, the snow turned red. Marcus tightened his grip on the reins. The image snow stained with blood seared through him. He had seen massacres before, but in Kaya's voice the memory was not history. It was a wound still bleeding. She went on, her words trembling with rage. "My father discovered the truth. He tried to stop it. That is why he died. Not of sickness, not of age, but because he stood against his brother's greed." Marcus wanted to reach for her shoulder, to give some human comfort. But the rope between them was a reminder of distance, of distrust. Instead, he said, low and rough, "Your father died with honor, and because of that, he left you the strength to carry on." Kaya turned away so he would not see the glimmer in her eyes, yet a small crack had opened in her armor, beneath the ice of hatred. A flicker of something else stirred not forgiveness, but the faintest spark of trust. They pressed on. Every mile was a gauntlet. Soldiers would shoot an Apache prisoner without question. Ayakowa's loyalists would kill Marcus for being white. The road ahead was danger in both directions. Each hoofbeat felt like a dare to fate. By a narrow stream, Marcus let his horse drink while Kaya knelt nearby, rope still biting into her wrists. But her gaze wasn't on her bonds. It reached toward the snow-capped mountains, far and solemn. "Do you know?" she whispered. "Every winter I hear the crying from those valleys. The children never cry loud. They cry in silence, lips turning blue, eyes wide when the cold steals their breath. And all of it, because of one man I once called uncle." Marcus knelt beside her, meeting her eyes not as a captor, not as an enemy, but as a man willing to share her grief. "We'll stop him," he said. "I swear it." She said nothing, but something shifted in her gaze. Not only fire of hatred now, but the faint reflection of belief. Fragile, but enough. Enough to walk another mile together. That night they made camp in a narrow gorge. Wind howled along the cliffs. The fire cracked and spat like a heartbeat in the dark. Marcus watched her across the flames, tense as a drawn bow, every muscle ready to strike. Yet when her head dipped, he glimpsed the tremor at the corner of her mouth. Not fear-burden. The crushing weight she carried alone. In the glow of firelight. Kaya lifted her head. Her voice was steady. "Iron-edged. I'll walk with you. But don't mistake me, I haven't forgotten. If you betray me, I'll be the one to end you before anyone else." Marcus did not flinch from her gaze. He nodded once. "If I betray you, you'll have that right." Something unspoken passed between them then. Not friendship, not yet alliance in the true sense, but a vow. Two souls bound by blood debt and necessity, walking side by side into the lair of a traitor. A path where every step could be the last. Danger waited in every shadow. Hatred still burned in their hearts. But for the first time, between Marcus Stone and Kaya, trust had begun to take root, small, fragile, and alive. That night, the small campfire flickered in the red canyon, casting restless shadows across two figures seated in silence. Around them, the darkness pressed close, thick and suffocating, as if it meant to swallow the world whole. Only the wind whispered through stone walls. Only the fire popped and cracked, beating like a faint heart against the vast silence. Marcus sat still, eyes following the sparks that rose upward, only to vanish among the countless stars. Across from him, Kaya's black hair spilled over her shoulders, firelight painting her cheekbones, deepening the darkness of her eyes. She looked both proud and weary, like a warrior who had walked too long down a road with no return. It was Marcus who finally broke the silence. "I had a sister once," he said slowly, his voice rough, rasping like wind across abandoned plains. "She died of fever when our regiment was still camped in Arkansas. I promised I'd bring her home, but the war dragged on too long. When I came back, all I found was a small grave by the river. Kaya lifted her gaze. For the first time, her eyes softened. I had a brother, she replied, her voice unsteady. He died one winter at 12 years old, died of hunger, of cold, because no help ever came. And now, other children will die too, if Ayakowa lives. They sat across from each other, 2 different lives bound by the same wound. No longer Apache and white, no longer enemy and stranger. Only 2 souls who had watched bloodkin vanish beneath the cruelty of a world they could not stop. Marcus drew a breath, his words heavy. I've killed more people than I've saved. Every night I still see their faces when I close my eyes. I thought I'd never balance those sins. Never find a way back. Kaya studied him for a long time, the fire's glow flickering in her gaze. And instead of accusation, she whispered, "But you tried to save my father." That means something. For Marcus, her words were not pity. They were a bridge, fragile but real, stretching across the abyss between them. Silence lingered. Then Kaya shifted closer, lowering herself beside him. Her shoulder brushed against his arm, warmth spreading into the cold night. He thought to pull away, to keep the safe distance, but her hand touched his wrist light. Steady, saying without words, "Stay. You're not like the other men," Kaya murmured, her voice softer than smoke. "Too many have looked at an Apache woman as nothing more than plunder. They wanted to take, to break. But you listen." Marcus turned, meeting her eyes, and for the first time, he did not see only hatred. He saw pain, determination, and now, the faint glow of something new, trust. "I can't promise I'll always be right," he said, voice low, "but I'll fight beside you. Until the end." A fleeting smile touched her lips, not joy, but acknowledgement he was no longer a stranger. They sat together like that for a long while, in the silence of 2 hearts daring to open. Between smoke and fire, among the scent of burning wood and the breath of night, a fragile bond began to kindle, not loud, not rushed like embers glowing under ash, waiting for the faintest wind to spark flame. Before lying back upon her rough blanket, Kaya whispered almost to herself, "If tomorrow one of us does not return, at least tonight." I believed. Marcus turned, catching one last look at her through the dying firelight. And he knew. Something had shifted forever. For in the fire of loss and violence, they had found what war could not destroy: empathy. And from empathy, trust. After 3 days riding through stone ridges and dry creek beds, they came upon the place the Apache called Wolf's Gorge. Wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the scent of old blood and smoke. Kaya pointed below a wide canyon lit with fire pits, horses tied in rows, rifles stacked in piles. At the center stood a great buffalo hide lodge, looming like a throne. "There," she whispered, her voice low. "Ayakowa." Through his field glass, Marcus counted them. Not only Apache warriors, but white outlaws, men who lived by plunder and blood money. At least 30 in plain sight, with more likely hidden in the shadows. A coalition of greed and violence. The plan was simple and deadly. Marcus would ride in as a traitor, offering captured rifles and ammunition. Kaya would cover from above with her Winchester. One nod, one shot that would be the signal if the masquerade collapsed into chaos. Marcus drew a steadying breath, tightened the reins, and rode down. Shadows stretched long across the dust as the guards rose, hands on their weapons. No one fired. From the great lodge stepped a tall man streaked with gray, his eyes cold as forged iron. "Ayakowa. A white man brings gifts to my camp," his voice boomed. Half in Apache, half in English. "What is it you want in return for your life?" Marcus dismounted slowly, keeping his movements measured. "Not life," he said evenly. "Profit. I bring guns and powder, and I need a partner strong enough to use them." A thin smile cut across Ayakowa's face, never touching his eyes. When Marcus pulled back the tarp to reveal the gleaming rifles, murmurs rippled through the camp. Greed flashed in their faces. "White men kill with coins," Ayakowa said. "We kill with steel and fire. If you want partnership, prove it. At dawn, Canyon Creek will burn. You will ride with us and kill as a warrior does." Marcus's chest tightened. Canyon Creek a small town, filled with families. He knew he couldn't allow it, but refusal now meant death. He forced himself to nod. "Agreed. But if I am to believe in this alliance, I need proof of your power. No one feeds 30 fighters without powerful friends." Ayakowa's eyes darkened. Then, as if proud to flaunt his reach, he waved Marcus into the lodge. Inside, the lanterns flickered over a table covered with maps. Red lines slashed across settlements. Canyon Creek, Cedar Falls, 3 more marked beyond. Next to them lay letters, stamped seals, official signatures. Marcus bent over the papers, heart hammering. Names, seals. All pointed to the same man, Colonel Harrison, Fort McKinney. "He ensures the soldiers march elsewhere when we strike." Ayakowa boasted, "In return, I give him chaos. I give him reason to crush those who resist. Apache. Settlers, it makes no difference. They are pieces on the board." The truth seared through Marcus like fire. This wasn't simple raiding. It was conspiracy slaughter sanctioned by a man in uniform. He had to act. As Ayakowa poured whiskey, raising it in toast, Marcus hurled the liquor into his face and drove his fist into the man's throat. Ayakowa staggered back, choking. Marcus snatched the bundle of papers, shoved them inside his coat, and bolted for the flap. Shouts split the night. Rifles swung toward him. A shaft of an arrow bit into the dirt by his boots as he vaulted into the saddle. Hooves thundered, bullets whining past his ears, then crack a rifle shot from the canyon rim. The lead rider tumbled lifeless from his horse. Kaya. Marcus bent low over his mount, spurring it hard toward the canyon mouth. Behind him, Ayakowa's roar carried both in Apache and English. "Seize him!" lead sang through the air. Dirt exploded at his heels, but each time a pursuer closed in, another Winchester shot cut him down. Kaya did not miss. As the last light of sunset painted the cliffs blood red, Marcus burst from the canyon's throat, lungs burning. At the edge, Kaya waited, her rifle still smoking. He raised the stolen papers high, gasping enough to hang Harrison and bury Ayakowa. Kaya swung into her saddle, eyes fierce with fire. "Then we reach Fort McKinney before he does." Together they rode into the night, carrying proof of a monstrous conspiracy and a vengeance that had only begun to burn. The thunder of hooves pounded through the narrow canyon, echoing against stone walls, tangled with shouts in both Apache and English. The glow of Ayakowa's camp still burned in Marcus's eyes, but ahead there was only one path escape, or die with the truth buried in his chest. Bullets hissed past his ears, sparking off rock. Arrows split the air, thudding into the dirt by his horse's hooves. Marcus pressed low against the saddle, reins biting into his fists, his breath ragged. He knew one stumble, one lucky shot, and the papers hidden in his coat would vanish with him into the gorge, high above. Kaya became his shield. The Winchester cracked again and again, each shot measured, deliberate, every time. A pursuer tumbled from his horse. She moved across the ridgeline with the speed of a shadow, as though the night itself cloaked her. Marcus urged his mount forward, Ayakowa's furious roar chasing him down the canyon. The war chief's voice split the night, raw with hatred. "Take him alive. Bring him back." A searing line tore across Marcus's arm. Blood streamed hot, but he didn't slow. He kicked harder, the horse screaming as it lunged into a desperate sprint. At the canyon mouth, Kaya was already there, rifle smoking. When Marcus galloped up, she hurled him a bulging leather pouch. "Documents," she shouted. "Maps, letters, I took everything." He caught it, shoved it deep into his saddlebag. For a heartbeat. Their eyes locked a look without words. Trust, resolve, a vow that neither would turn back now. Behind them, Torches flared, lighting the gorge like a river of fire. The roar of pursuit swelled. Time was gone. "Ride," Kaya cried, spurring her horse alongside his. Together they tore out of Wolf's Gorge, leaving chaos behind. Wind slapped their faces. Dust rose in choking clouds. Neither dared glance back. Every heartbeat was survival. Darkness deepened as they rode hard, the trail vanishing into shadow. Only the hammer of their hearts and the rasp of their breath remained. Marcus's hand pressed against his saddlebag inside. The papers weighed heavier than iron. Not parchment, but the fate of countless innocents. At last, they pulled under a sheer rock wall, gasping for air. Sweat, dust, and blood clung to them. Kaya seized his arm, her fingers steady as she tore fabric from her dress to bind the wound. Her voice was sharp, commanding, "You don't get to die. Not while we carry this." Marcus managed a grim smile through the pain. "Not yet. I still owe you a promise. Far off." The mournful blare of a war horn drifted on the wind, Ayakowa calling more men to the chase. They both knew the escape was only the beginning. The road to Fort McKinney stretched long ahead, and the traitor would not rest while his secrets lay in their hands. Before mounting again, Marcus pulled a few sheets from the pouch. By the flicker of their fire, he and Kaya read the damning words, maps, signatures, military seals, proof carved into ink. Harrison was not just complicit, he was commanding it. They exchanged a single look. From this moment forward, they were no longer two wanderers on the frontier. They were the carriers of justice, fragile but real, against a power built on betrayal. Marcus folded the papers, tucking them inside his coat. Kaya's eyes burned with a fire that no longer wavered. Hatred turned to strength. Suspicion hardened into trust, under a star-strewn sky. They spurred their horses into the night, leaving the canyon behind in flames and fury. The daring escape was over, but the true war had only just begun. The first light of dawn broke over the eastern hills as two dust-covered riders galloped toward the heavy timber gates of Fort McKinney. The stars and stripes snapped in the wind. Bugles called the changing of the guard, and rifles along the wall angled downward. "Halt, who goes there?" a sentry barked from the watchtower. Marcus raised one hand high, the other gripping a bundle of weather-worn papers tied with rawhide. Urgent dispatch for General Morrison concerning Colonel Harrison and Ayakowa. For a breath, the wall bristled with suspicion. Then the bugle sounded again, and the gates groaned open, as if history itself were about to be torn apart. Inside, they were escorted straight to the command house. General Morrison stood waiting, shoulders squared, silver hair at his temples, eyes bright with the weary wisdom of a man who had seen too many frontier deceits. Marcus laid the packet on the desk. The papers were creased from the hard ride, but the seals still glared red, the signatures stark in black ink. Morrison's hand trembled slightly as he read. Skepticism turned to shock, then hardened into the cold fury of a soldier discovering rot inside his own command. "Harrison," Morrison growled, lightning flashing in his gaze. "He's used the flag of this government to cloak murder, an entire network feeding on the blood of innocents." Kaya's voice rang clear, her dark eyes fierce. "Not only white settlers died. My people too. Apache women, children slaughtered for one man's ambition and another's betrayal." The general lifted his head, meeting her gaze. He nodded slowly, firmly. "No one else dies for this filth. I swear it." By the following day, Colonel Harrison was arrested in full view of the garrison. He shouted, cursed, claimed conspiracy. But Marcus flung the signed letters at his feet, and the crowd of officers saw with their own eyes seals, orders, signatures. There was no denying it. From there, the collapse spread like fire through dry grass. Gunrunners, crooked traitors, even officers who had profited from bloodshed all dragged into the light. A network once fed by silence and complicity unraveled because two riders carried truth across the frontier. Ayakowa raged when word reached him, but stripped of gold, guns, and the shield of the army, His pack of wolves scattered. Some fled into the hills. Others were hunted down. He who had called himself ruler in the shadows became nothing more than an old wolf chased by his own kind. The raids that had been etched in red ink on maps now existed only as ashes. Marcus stood atop Fort McKinney's walls, watching the horizon blaze with morning sun. For the first time in years, his breath came easy. He had survived. He had kept his word. And his hands carried not only blood, but justice. Kaya joined him, her long hair lifted by the clean wind. Her eyes no longer burned with vengeance alone, but with the proud fire of vindication. For the first time, she saw Apache lives shielded not by blade, but by truth. My father would smile. She whispered, voice trembling yet strong. Marcus nodded, his gaze steady on the light spreading eastward. And I, for the first time in many years, I think I can sleep without nightmares. In that moment, beneath the bright western sun. Victory was not measured in cheers or smoke, but in silence, the deep, satisfying silence of knowing they had stood on the side of justice. The evening sun spilled gold across the valleys of Colorado. Wind stirred through endless green meadows, carrying the sound of a small stream winding its way past young willows. And there, at the heart of this quiet picture, stood a modest wooden cabin, its gray shingles plain, its chimney breathing a ribbon of smoke that curled toward the sky like a promise. After so much blood and grief, here was proof that life could begin again. Marcus stood on the porch, leaning against the wooden rail, his eyes sweeping across the valley. 6 months had passed since Fort McKinney, since Harrison's betrayal had been dragged into daylight and Ayakowa's dark power broken. 6 months since Marcus and Kaya had turned away from vengeance to try and build something different, something fragile, something precious, a home. Behind him, Kaya stepped out, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. The simple blue dress she wore clung softly to her figure, her walk slower now but no less graceful. Her face, once sharpened by fury and loss, glowed in the gentle light of evening. Within her was a promise of the future life born from sorrow, love rising from ashes. Marcus turned, his gaze lingering on her. No longer the wary eyes of two enemies trapped in suspicion, no longer the desperate glances exchanged in fire and flight. His look now was that of a man who had found a reason to keep breathing. He placed his hand over hers, on the curve of her stomach, and whispered, "We walked through hell, Kaya, but now, at last, we have a little heaven of our own." Tears welled in her eyes, not bitter anymore, but bright with release. "My father would smile if he saw us like this," she said, her voice trembling, but sure. He believed justice needed someone brave enough to stand for it. And now, this child will know their parents chose that path. The days in the valley were free of gunfire, but no less demanding. Marcus, once a soldier, learned to sow seed, split logs, mend fences. The hands that once pulled triggers grew calloused from turning soil. Kaya, once a warrior's daughter with a knife always near, learned to tend the garden, stitch cloth, and prepare for motherhood. Yet in her steady eyes still burned the strength that had carried her through every trial. Each evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the mountains glow red in the setting sun. They needed no words. The silence itself was their reward, a peace bought with pain, now held in fragile, reverent hands. But peace in the West was always fragile, and both knew that justice, once revealed, must always be guarded. Perhaps the day would come when they would have to rise again, when the shadows crept back across this hard land. And now, dear friends, we turn to you. We have followed Marcus and Kaya from the moment of a knife at his throat, through disguises and peril, through the fire of Ayakowa's camp, and into the halls of Fort McKinney, where truth was finally spoken. And now, here they stand in the light of a new life, a cabin in a green valley, a child soon to be born. So what do you think comes next? If you were in their place, would you hold tight to this peace-planting corn? Raising a child in the safety of the valley? Or would you prepare to rise once more, ready to defend justice when the dark returns? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Support their journey. And let us know what you believe Marcus and Kaya should choose, because their story, like the frontier itself, is not closed. Love, justice, and rebirth will always need those willing to step forward. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story where passion and justice burn beneath the endless skies of the American West.